The world turned white so fast it felt like a punishment. One moment the patrol had a horizon, distant ribs of rock and a smudge of tree lean on the eastern slope. The next, the basin swallowed everything. Sky and ground fused into a single blinding plane, and depth became a lie. Shapes vanished at 10 meters. The only proof of movement was the sound of breath inside hoods and the crunch of boots breaking crust. They were in the middle of an exfil, stringing across an exposed snowfield toward a pickup zone that had looked sensible on a map. Two light vehicles led, engines laboring, tires chewing at powder that hid hard ice underneath. Behind them, the rest moved on foot in disciplined spacing, dark figures in white, heads down, rifles carried low to keep muzzles from packing with snow. Wind came in harsh pulses, punching at them sideways. It found gaps in sleeves and collars and filled them with knives. It stole the warmth from faces, from fingers, from the thin line between calm and panic. Then the first burst cracked from nowhere. It wasn't a long spray. It was short and controlled, a fast rip that sounded too close. The lead vehicle lurched like it had been yanked by an invisible chain. Metal groaned. The engine surged and then coughed, stuttering as if choking on cold air and snow. Someone screamed, pain first, then warning. Down! Down! Bodies dropped in a reflex as old as training. They collapsed into a shallow drainage line that cut across the basin, a depression that looked like cover only from a distance. Inside it was barely a dip. Hard ground pressed up under a thin layer of snow. The lip rose just high enough to collect them, not high enough to hide them. A ditch that wasn't cover, just a place to die slower. Rounds snapped through the white, invisible until they were suddenly loud. Snow kicked up in dirty bursts. A helmet thumped against frozen earth. Someone swore, not loudly, the way people do when their voice is already busy holding fear down. The lieutenant, young, face raw from wind, pressed his radio immediately. Raven actual, this is Raven 2, contact. Static slammed into his ear like a fist. Not the crackle of bad weather. Not the hiss of a distant storm. This was steady and dense, a thick blanket of noise that didn't fade with a change in position. It didn't flutter. It didn't breathe. He tried again on a different frequency. Same wall of sound. A corporal ripped off a glove and smacked the side of the handset, as if he could beat signal back into it. His fingers were already whitening, the skin turning stiff in the cold. The noise didn't even stutter. Hand signals would have been the next step, but visibility made gestures unreliable. Arms disappeared beyond a few meters. Faces were masked behind goggles, fogged with breath. The enemy's geometry appeared in fragments, the way a trap reveals itself only after the jaw has closed. Fire came from above, somewhere on the ridgeline that rose over the basin like a frozen wave. It wasn't constant, not a spray. It was timed, precise, punishing. Another angle cut from the tree lean to the east, lower but closer, raking the ditch line. Crossfire, overlapping arcs. A kill zone pinned by elevation and angle, shaped with intention. Like someone had drawn on a map and then walked it in person to make sure every escape route ended in open snow. A medic started moving before anyone told him. He crawled along the ditch, belly dragging, trying to keep his silhouette below the lip. His pack snagged on frozen brush, and he tore it free with a jerk that made him hiss through clenched teeth. He reached the team leader near the lead vehicle, half in the ditch, half on open snow. Blood was already darkening the white, spreading slow because cold thickened it. The medic shoved a hand under the man's plate carrier, felt wet warmth, and swore softly. He wrapped a bandage, but the fabric stiffened the moment it hit air, turning rigid like it was trying to become wood. "Stay with me," he said, but wind stole the words. A rifleman tried to sprint for a rock outcrop that was barely visible, a darker smudge in the fog. 3 steps, a single crack, not a burst. One precise shot. The rifleman folded and vanished into the snow as if the basin had simply taken him. No one moved after that. Movement was being punished with clinical timing. An unseen marksman was watching for anything that rose above the ditch, waiting for the smallest mistake. The lieutenant saw it in the way heads stayed low, in the way hands tightened on rifles but didn't lift them. The extraction window had always been the plan's heartbeat. They had timed this route to reach the pickup zone before the weather fully closed. Aircraft didn't linger in this altitude. Crews didn't gamble blind approaches after a certain point. If they missed the window, it wasn't late. It was alone. Somewhere out there, rotor noise existed as a rumor. The kind of rumor you wanted so badly, you started hearing it in the wind. And the clock, the clock was no longer a device. It was a pressure behind the ribs. It made every breath feel like it cost something. The lieutenant raised his head to shout a plan. A hard, clean rifle report cut through the storm. It wasn't like the enemy's shots. Their fire echoed messy through snow and rock. The sound softened at the edges. This was different. A single note, sharp and confident, as if it knew exactly where it needed to go. A heartbeat later, the hostile overwatch went silent. Not quieted, not paused. Silent, like a switch flipped. The patrol froze. Even the wind seemed to hesitate. Then another shot, same clean tone, and the crew-served weapon from the Trilene coughed once and stopped, its rhythm broken mid-beat. A third shot. Someone screamed faintly through the whiteout, and then there was less fire. Not none, but less, as if a quiet hand was turning down the volume of violence. The lieutenant pressed his radio again, desperate. Static still roared, but it wavered, just a fraction, like a crack opening in a door. He heard the faintest hint of a voice beneath it, too weak to make out. Enough to prove the noise wasn't weather. They couldn't see who was helping. They couldn't prove it was help. But the pressure eased inch by inch. The basin kept changing because of that unseen rifle. The lieutenant swallowed and forced himself into function. He looked at the medic, at the wounded team leader, at the men pressed into the ditch like stones sunk into white. "Keep him alive," he rasped. He looked up into the blank sky, where the ridge should be, and felt, for the first time since contact, something that wasn't fear. He felt the shape of rescue. Hours earlier, dawn had come pale and reluctant, as if the sun didn't want to climb into a sky full of hard weather. The guard post sat above the mountain pass, like a forgotten tooth, concrete, weather-stained, half-buried by drifts that rose against its walls. Daylight washed over it, thin and gray, filtered through drifting snow and the low angle of the sun. Everything looked faded. The mountains wore their winter like armor. Inside the post, the air smelled like cold metal and old coffee. The heater clicked and sighed, but pushed out more noise than warmth. Frost feathered the edges of the observation slit, clinging to the inside like a delicate trap. A folding chair sat near the firing aperture. A battered table held a map, a notebook, and a radio that looked older than everyone assigned to it. A junior NCO sat with her back straight, rifle across her lap, eyes on the narrow window. She had the compact strength of someone who carried weight in silence. Her face was calm in a way that got mistaken for boredom by people who didn't understand calm as a skill. Her gloves were patched at the fingertips where fabric had worn thin from constant work. Her rifle was clean and oiled, the metal cared for like it mattered. She had been assigned to watch duty at this post because someone decided it was low risk. A placeholder billet, a line on a roster. The pass was quiet, they said. The main route was secure. The post was just in case. People joked she was guarding snow. She didn't laugh with them. Not because she couldn't take a joke, but because she had learned jokes sometimes hid carelessness, and carelessness got people killed. Her world was small. A cracked observation slit. A simple range card taped to the wall. Hand-drawn lines marking dead ground and likely avenues. A map with pencil shading where the basin opened into a wide, exposed bowl. A notebook with dates and wind notes. A torn strip of cloth tied to a metal rod outside, fluttering and snapping in the gusts, her wind ribbon. Her simplest instrument. She checked it the way other people checked their phone, often without thinking, because information mattered. She logged gusts and lulls. She watched snow cornices on the ridgeline, how they shifted, how they sagged, where hairline cracks formed. She'd seen enough collapses to know snow could kill as efficiently as bullets. She also noted something else. A dead zone in the radio. Not complete. Not constant. A stretch of static that came and went like someone flipping a switch. Terrain could block signal, sure. Terrain didn't pulse. She ran a comms check anyway, because routine was armor. Guard post, radio check, she said. The reply came faint, then got swallowed, then returned. Patchy, unreliable, unfriendly. Over the radio, she heard chatter about the patrol crossing the basin by midday, hitting pickup before weather closed the pass. Confidence, familiarity, people doing something the same way enough times that it started to feel invincible. She also heard dismissiveness. Stop looking for ghosts, someone joked. This whole valley's just wind and stories. She put her eye to the long glass, scope mounted on a simple tripod, and scanned the valley slow, patient, metronome steady. Most of the basin was empty white, but she had trained her vision to find wrongness inside emptiness. A line too straight, a shadow too deliberate, a glint too regular. She found the first sign near the far slope, a new scar in the snow that cut against the natural curve of wind drifts, like something had been dragged or a shallow trench had been packed down. Farther up, near a patch of exposed rock, she saw a faint straight line, too clean to be a crack, too uniform to be a natural feature. Her breathing stayed even. Her pulse did not. The body knew before the mind admitted it. She marked the points on her range card. She drew a thin pencil circle on the map and wrote one word beside it: unnatural. A senior came through the post later, boots stomping snow off, face pinched with irritation. He glanced at her notes, and then at the valley, as if the valley was a boring lecture. "This place is a waste," he muttered. "You could be doing something useful." His eyes flicked to her rifle, to the long glass. "Too careful," he said, like it was an insult. Then he gave her more tasks: inventory, fuel checks, a generator issue, anything that pulled her away from the slit. It wasn't cruelty. It was impatience. He didn't understand the value of someone who watched. When he left, she did the tasks quickly, efficiently, and returned to the window. Outside, wind worried at the ribbon, snapping it sideways. She watched how it fluttered, how it fell, how it straightened. Gust patterns weren't random. They were stories if you listened. She took a step outside to check the sensor line. A cheap set of trip sensors and a thin comms cable that ran along the post's outer wall. Snow crunched under her boots, loud in the quiet. She followed the cable with her eyes, then with her hands, brushing snow away. Half a meter from a junction box, the cable ended in a clean cut. Not snapped, not chewed. Cut. Her throat tightened. A clean cut meant intention. Preparation. Someone had blinded the post without needing to fight it. She crouched, gloved fingers tracing the exposed copper. Her breath fogged in her goggles. She hurried back inside and grabbed the radio. Guard post to Raven actual, urgent, sensor line cut, possible. Static swallowed her words. Not the crackle of weather. The same steady noise, thick and deliberate, pressed into her ear. She waited. The noise cleared for half a second. She tried again. Possible enemy prep, basin compromised. Static returned like a hand over mouth. It pulsed. On, off, on, as if someone was testing it. Her jaw set. She didn't waste breath on frustration. She wrote it down in her notebook because memory was slippery under stress and paper didn't lie. Back in the guard post locker, behind spare gloves and folded tarps, she kept a sealed packet. It was thin, waterproof, marked with a date from months earlier. Inside was a small piece of evidence from a prior operation, something she had never handed in because she didn't trust the process that followed. Not because she was rebellious, but because she had seen what happened when people treated clean as more important than true. She had watched a mistake get buried under bureaucracy because admitting it would bruise reputations. That day had taught her that precision wasn't ego. Precision was responsibility, and responsibility was lonely. She didn't open the packet now. She didn't need to. The weight of it in her locker was enough to remind her, do not rush. Do not guess. Do not shoot unless you can live with the outcome. She returned to the slit, long glass steady, and rehearsed firing solutions the way other people prayed. Landmarks, angles, likely positions if someone tried to interdict the basin. A ridgeline notch that offered partial view. A tree-lean pocket that could hide a team. Distances measured by map, confirmed by eye. The weather thickened earlier than forecast. Snow started to drift in heavier sheets. The sun became a pale coin. The valley's contrast faded. Shapes softened. Most people would have used the chance to warm up, to drink coffee, to step away and let their mind relax. She stayed on the scope. Because something felt staged. Because someone had cut her sensor line clean. Because the radio dead zone pulsed like a heartbeat that wasn't hers. And because she had learned that when the world went quiet in the mountains, it was often because something was holding its breath. By midday, the basin was a white bowl filled with moving fog. The patrol entered it anyway, because orders were orders and the plan was the plan. Snow reflected harsh daylight, turning depth perception into a trick. The surface looked flat until boots found hidden dips and uneven crust. Every step threatened a slip, a stumble, a sound that carried farther than you wanted. Comms degraded first, voices turning thin, then broken, then died into that steady noise. The lieutenant tried alternate channels. He tried raising the antenna. He tried shielding the radio with his body. Static stayed. They used hand signals. They tried to keep spacing. But visibility made even gestures unreliable. Arms disappeared into the white. Faces were blurred smudges behind goggles. First contact came with disciplined bursts and single shots. Not random. Not panic fire. Timed movement. Focused on leaders. A corporal raised his head to look for the ridge and got a round through the edge of his helmet that spun him sideways. A second shot punched into the snow inches from the lieutenant's shoulder like a warning. Radios jammed. Visibility collapsing. Terrain disadvantage. The basin was open ground. The enemy held high ground. The tree-lean angle trapped them from the side. A vehicle took a hit and immobilized, turning the route into a bottleneck. The patrol compressed without meaning to, bodies clustering where there was at least the illusion of cover. A wounded teammate increased urgency. The medic's hands numbed fast. He fought his own fingers as much as the injury, trying to keep pressure on a wound while the bandage stiffened and the cold tried to steal blood back into the earth. Ammo discipline became immediate. Magazines were finite. Hands fumbled reloads because gloves were bulky and fingertips were numb. Rifles ran cold, but not harmless. Every shot had to justify itself, because every shot was a chance to reveal position, a chance to weigh something you might need later. The enemy revealed structure. A jammer team somewhere behind the ridgeline, feeding that steady noise like a siren. A marksman overwatch punishing movement. A crew-served element that walked fire in short bursts to pin heads down and prevent any break contact maneuver. The patrol tried a textbook response. Smoke, bounding, alternate route, but every attempt was punished. An RPG splashed close enough to shower ice fragments into the ditch like shrapnel. Someone screamed when a shard cut his cheek. The noise of it was raw and too human inside all the white. The extraction window became a character. The planned pickup time was fixed. Weather closing meant aircraft might not risk the approach after a certain minute. Every delay was a narrowing tunnel. The lieutenant felt time pressing from behind, and then he realized something that twisted his stomach. They weren't being annihilated. They were being shaped. The enemy's fire herded them toward a particular depression in the basin, toward a place where the ground dipped just enough to trap them without hiding them, toward a spot that kept them alive but helpless. Like the enemy wanted them pinned right there. Alive, not just dead. Back at the guard post, the young NCO watched the basin vanish into white. She couldn't see the patrol. She couldn't see the enemy, but she could see the rhythm. Gust breaks came in patterns. In those patterns, muzzle flashes flared, brief orange pinpricks against gray. She counted them, watched their cadence, mapped their probable positions on a range card. Pattern recognition over sight clarity. She tried to relay a warning. The jammer smothered her too. That confirmed it. The enemy didn't just want to win a fight. They wanted isolation. They wanted each piece cut off from every other piece, so help arrive too late or not at all. Her throat tightened, but she didn't waste breath on panic. She checked her rifle. She checked her magazines. She checked her map. Then she made a decision with consequences. Staying meant watching them die. Moving meant leaving the post undermanned and stepping into terrain that killed the careless. It meant leaving warmth, such as it was, for a ridge line where wind could rip the heat out of her core in minutes. Either choice was dangerous. She chose to move. Minimal kit, rifle, a few magazines, range card, a small radio, cold weather essentials, a length of cord, a simple marker flare, nothing extra, because extra weight was extra time, and time was bleeding away. The wind slapped her the moment she stepped outside. Snow crawled into her collar. The ribbon snapped hard, almost horizontal, warning her about gusts she couldn't see. Equipment risk stacked immediately. Her optic could fog. Battery could drain. Cold ate power like hunger. Movement was restricted by wind slabs and exposed traverses. In places, the snow was packed hard and slick. In others, it was deceptively deep, swallowing her calves and stealing speed. Time pressure squeezed her every step. She used terrain, reading the way some people used instinct. She avoided obvious routes. She followed rock ribs that broke wind, that offered dark contrast against the white, so she could keep her own silhouette low. She crawled where standing would put her against the glare. She moved in the moments between gusts, when sound was masked, when snow drifted thick enough to hide tracks quickly. The jammer complicated everything. She couldn't coordinate with the patrol. She couldn't receive their position. She had to predict it by geometry, by the route they were supposed to take, by the likely place the enemy would choose to trap them, by the pattern of flashes she'd seen. The mountains made every sound strange. Sometimes a shot echoed, like it came from the wrong direction. Sometimes the wind carried it away completely. As she climbed, she found signs of preparation up close. Footprints packed under fresh powder, camouflaged by someone who knew what they were doing. A shallow dug-in rest near a rock face. Snow piled carefully, not the random mound of drift. A faint line where an antenna cable had been dragged and then covered. Confirmation. Not suspicion, confirmation. This was planned. She kept moving, heart steady, breath controlled. Not because she wasn't afraid. Because fear was a sensation, and she had work to do. Through a thin gap in the storm, she caught sight of something near a small hut or waypoint farther down, an isolated structure used by locals and patrols alike. A figure stood near it, not carrying a rifle, not in uniform, a non-combatant, bundled in rough clothes, head down against the wind, close to where enemy movement seemed to flicker in and out of the white. The moral constraint landed like a weight. Collateral wasn't an abstract word here. It was a person in the wrong place. She adjusted. She chose angles that would separate threats from that figure, even if it made shots harder, even if it cost precious seconds, even if it meant passing on easier targets until the geometry was clean. Her optics started to ice at the edges. A thin film crept in, distorting the sight picture. She had to warm it carefully with gloved breath without leaving obvious vapor plumes that could betray her position. She tucked her face close, breathed in controlled bursts, wiped with a cloth she kept inside her jacket. Tiny problem. Huge stakes. She reached a precarious high point, an overhang where rock jutted out like a frozen lip. It offered a cross angle into the basin. Not better visibility, better geometry. From here, she could see into the kill zone from the side, threading a line between ridge and treeline. She could catch enemy positions that the patrol couldn't see. She could become a lever. She settled into the stone like she belonged there, body pressed low, rifle supported, range card beside her, pencil ready. She tested line of sight in short gust windows. The storm offered glimpses like a cruel game. Half a second of clarity, then white again. In those half seconds, she built a firing solution from fragments. Muzzle flash timing. Sound delay. Predicted positions. The way an enemy shooter's rhythm created a pattern as dependable as a metronome. She identified the first true force multiplier. Not the man pulling the trigger on the ridge. The system feeding the steady noise into every radio. The jammer. Silence the jammer. And the patrol might coordinate. Might call for help. Might create their own opening. The impossible shot took shape in her mind. Extreme angle. Partial visibility. When she couldn't fully read because it shifted around rock faces. a target she might only see as a flicker of movement near an antenna, and a shot that had to be perfect because she wouldn't get a second chance before the enemy adapted. Her pulse rose. Fear did that. Her hand stayed steady anyway. Function over feeling. She waited for the gust to thin, for the world to give her a sliver of truth. The antenna line appeared, dark thread against white. A shape hunched beside it, gloved hands adjusting something near a pack. She exhaled halfway and held. Pressed the trigger. The rifle report cracked clean through the storm. She didn't watch the bullet. She watched the effect. The hunched shape jolted. The antenna dipped. The steady static in her earpiece flickered, not gone but wounded, like a machine stuttering. Down in the basin, enemy fire hesitated for a heartbeat. Proof. She wasn't guessing. She was changing the fight. Fragments of friendly comms bled through the noise. Broken syllables, half-words, the sound of a lieutenant's voice fighting static. Enough to confirm the patrol's pinned position. Enough to let her align her map with reality. Now came the quiet calculus. She built her target ladder the way you built a bridge. Start with the supports, not the paint. First, the jammer's operator and relay. Finish what she'd started. Second, the enemy marksman overwatch. The one punishing movement, the one keeping heads down with single shots. Third, the RPG team. The one that could turn a ditch into a grave with a single splash. Fourth, the crew-served weapon lead. The suppression that trapped the patrol in place. Fifth, the squad leader and spotter pair. The coordination node that kept the ambush coherent. Sixth, runners and relays. The ones who would adapt, reposition, keep the enemy from collapsing. She confirmed each target with minimal exposure. Short scope peaks timed to gusts. Eye in, eye out. No lingering. No silhouette. She fired only when the geometry was clean and the non-combatant near the hut was not in danger. She found a marksman by his discipline. He didn't fire fast. He fired when movement happened, and he waited in between. His shots came in a rhythm that said patience and experience. She bait-read his cadence by watching where he hit. A round snapped into the snow where a rifleman had tried to move earlier. Another hit the lip of the ditch when a helmet rose half an inch. The marksman wasn't just shooting. He was training them not to move. That rhythm became habit. Habit was weakness. She waited for his next expected shot window. When the gust thinned, she saw it. A faint dark shape prone near a rock notch, just enough outline to betray him to someone who knew what to look for. She exhaled, pressed, and the rifle spoke once. The shape went still. In the basin, something changed immediately. A rifleman lifted his head and didn't get punished. A hand waved, signaling movement, and the signal didn't draw a bullet. The patrol's posture shifted from helpless to tactical. They started moving, slow, deliberate. Two-man drags. A wounded teammate pulled deeper into the ditch line, closer to what little cover existed. Someone tossed smoke or improvised concealment, the wind ripping it sideways, but still creating confusion. Ammo constraint tightened on a ridge. She counted her shots like seconds. Every miss was a dead teammate. Every hit was another breath purchased. The enemy realized they were being dismantled. You could feel it in the change of their fire. Suppression that had been rhythmic became erratic for a moment as someone tried to find the source. The crew-served element shifted, walking fire higher up the slope, searching for the angle that was hurting them. Then adaptation arrived, as inevitable as weather. A small flanking element started climbing toward her ridge line using the same rock ribs she had used. They were smart enough to choose a route that masked them from the basin, approaching from behind. A low buzzing appeared briefly in a gust break. An improvised quad drone, small and mean, searching for heat and motion. It drifted, disappeared, returned, like a wasp hunting a sting. Ice chips exploded around her ledge as the crew-served weapon tried to bracket her position. Not accurate enough yet to hit, but close enough to warn. They were probing. Her radio battery faded in the cold, the display dimming. The optic edge iced again. She had to choose. Stay and finish the ladder, risking being pinned by bracketing fire and spotted by the drone. Or relocate and risk losing the angle that made her effective. She moved inches, not meters. Micro-movement, a crawl that shifted her silhouette behind a rock fold while keeping the same line into the basin. She pulled her jacket tight, reduced heat's signature, flattened herself into stone. Calm under chaos, surgical. She found the RPG team next. They were closer to the tree lean, using the wideout to mask their movement. She caught them by the shape of their burden and the way they paused to coordinate. Two figures, one carrying a tube, the other acting as eyes. She waited until the non-combatant near the hut was clear, until the background was clean. One shot. The tube dropped. The second figure staggered backward, vanished into snow. The patrol moved again. Faster now, as if someone had loosened a rope around their throats. The lieutenant shouted, but the wind took his words. His men didn't need words anymore. They felt the opening. Enemy cohesion started to fray, but not enough. Not yet. The turning point in fights like this wasn't killing everyone. It was breaking the brain of the ambush, removing the thing that made it a system instead of a bunch of frightened people with guns. She watched the ridge line through gust gaps and looked for the true node. Not the loudest weapon, the organizer. She saw them as a cluster near a rock shelf, one figure gesturing, another checking the antenna line again, another looking down into the basin with optics. Command and control compressed into a few meters of snow and stone. And then she spotted the backup relay. A secondary antenna tucked behind a rock, lower profile, hidden from most angles. If the first jammer was wounded, this was their patch, what kept the static alive enough to keep the patrol isolated. That was the cohesion node. That was the turning point shot. The problem, the angle was ugly. Wind turbulence around the rock shelf would drift the bullet. Visibility offered only brief truth. The drone buzz returned, hovering somewhere out of sight, but close enough that she could hear it in the gaps between gusts. She had one chance before they fully counterhunted her. She steadied through fear. Her hands were cold. Her breathing was controlled. The world narrowed to a thin tunnel between optic and target. A gust thinned. The backup relay appeared, dark thread against white. She pressed the trigger. The rifle cracked. The relay snapped sideways. The figure near it jerked and collapsed. The antenna line fell into the snow like a cut vein. In her earpiece, static dropped from a roar to a ragged hiss. Voices broke through, suddenly clearer, as if the world had regained its edges. Raven 2, say again. The patrol shouted coordinates, smoke color, anything that could guide aircraft. The lieutenant's voice came through hoarse and stunned. They moved to hard cover, a rock outcrop, a deeper ditch line, pulling wounded along, reorganizing in seconds because they could finally talk. They signaled the aircraft with a last-ditch visual marker. Something bright against white. Enemy fire lost rhythm. Suppression stuttered. The flanking element hesitated. The crew served weapon paused, trying to find new instruction in a system that had been shot through. The kill zone's shape collapsed. The enemy, competent and intentional, tried one last move. They shifted toward capture, not because it was easy, but because it was why they were here. They had wanted someone alive, a specialist, a piece of route knowledge, something that could be paraded later as proof they could reach into the mountains and take what they wanted. Propaganda mattered. A living prisoner mattered. She saw the attempt in glimpses, figures pushing closer to the ditch line, using the storm, trying to hook around the patrol's flank and snatch someone in the confusion. Her shots denied it. Not reckless fire, precise. The kind that broke attempts before they became success. A runner dropped. Another staggered and fell behind a rock, dragging himself away. The enemy began to retreat, not because they were routed, but because the cost was climbing too fast. They had lost their jammer, lost their overwatch, lost their clean geometry. They were still dangerous, but their plan had cracked. The drone buzz returned, closer now, angry and searching. It drifted above her ledge for a heartbeat, then slid away, buffeted by wind. Footsteps crunched in snow crust behind her. Close. The counterhunt had reached her ridge. She didn't turn fast. Fast was loud. Fast was clumsy. She shifted her rifle slowly, angled her body behind stone, listened. Breathing. A whisper of fabric. the soft clack of a weapon being adjusted. She could run, try to vanish into the storm, and trust the mountains to hide her. She could hide, press deeper in a rock, and hope the enemy passed by. Or she could hold, stay in place long enough to protect the last seconds of extraction, because the patrol was still in danger until rotors lifted them out. She chose hold, because she could hear it now, faint at first, then unmistakable. Rotor noise, not a rumor anymore. A real sound cutting through the storm like an approaching verdict. The footsteps behind her shifted, closing. She timed her breath to the gusts, used the wind's roar to mask the smallest movements. She kept her rifle aimed toward the basin, not toward her rear, because she understood priority. The patrol's survival depended on her angle more than her own. A shape emerged in the white behind her. Too close, too sudden. She caught it in peripheral vision, a dark smear against the fog. She didn't swing wildly. She didn't panic. She let the shape come into the edge of her awareness, and then snapped her rifle just enough. Not a dramatic movement, a controlled adjustment. A shot cracked. The shape dropped. Another set of footsteps stopped dead, as if whoever was second had learned instantly what the first had failed to learn. This ridge was owned. The rotor noise swelled. Snow churned in the basin as aircraft approached, invisible until suddenly present as a dark mass in white, blades beating air into a violent vortex. Down below, the patrol surged toward the pickup point, pulling wounded, covering each other, moving with the efficiency that returned when people could finally speak to each other again. She watched until the last figure disappeared into the storm churn. Only then did she lift her head fully, looking toward the aircraft's shadow. She tried her radio. "Guard post," she began. Her battery died mid-syllable. Cold had eaten it completely. She swallowed, tasting metal and dry air, and stood. The world swayed slightly, not from injury, but from exhaustion and the delayed arrival of adrenaline. She forced herself to move, one step at a time, toward the pickup zone. Her legs felt heavy, but she kept them steady. She reached the edge of the landing area just as the aircraft lifted, snow blasting sideways, the sound so loud it erased thought. A crewman leaned out, arm extended. She grabbed it, fingers stiff, grip clumsy. Strong hands hauled her up. Inside, heat hit her face like a wave, almost painful. The smell of fuel and sweat and blood mixed in the cramped space. Wounded lay strapped down, eyes glassy. The medic looked up and then blinked as if he couldn't believe she was real. The lieutenant stared at her, goggles off, face pale. "You," he began, and his voice broke. She didn't answer immediately because her throat was tight and her breath still belonged to the mountain. She just nodded once, the smallest motion. Outside, the basin shrank beneath them like a bad dream. In the debrief room later, warmth felt unnatural. Fluorescent lights buzzed. Air was dry. The smell of coffee was sharp. People spoke in normal tones, which somehow made everything that had happened feel stranger. Officers replayed fragments of audio, static, broken syllables, sudden clarity after the turning point shot. They watched shaky footage from optics and body cams, trying to make the chaos fit into boxes and bullet points. They asked how she got in the angle. They asked why the patrol hadn't been warned earlier. They asked where the enemy's jammer had been placed. She answered in plain language. She talked about the cut sensor line, clean, deliberate. About the radio dead zone, pulsing like a switch. About the unnatural scars in the snow and the straight lines where wind wouldn't carve. About the antenna drag marks. She explained the ridge cross angle, the way the overhang gave her geometry even when visibility was collapsing. She talked about timing gusts, about muzzle flash rhythm, about choosing targets that mattered. They asked what the enemy had wanted. That part, intelligence confirmed quickly. The ambush hadn't been designed just to kill. It had been designed to seize something alive. A specialist in the patrol who carried sensitive knowledge of the route network and sensor coverage. A living prisoner was propaganda. A prisoner could be filmed, paraded, used to prove the enemy could reach into the mountains and take what they wanted. The jamming wasn't just for confusion. It was to isolate, delay response, prevent quick reinforcement, and force surrender in a place where surrender felt like the only way to keep wounded alive. The enemy had cut the corridor's sensors days earlier to guarantee the trap and delay the first warning. They had rehearsed the kill zone like a drill. They had held their fire patterns in a way that shaped rather than obliterated. Competent, intentional, dangerous. The room was quiet when the full shape of it landed. Then the senior who had called the guard post a waste shifted in his chair. His eyes flicked to her, and there was something in his face that wasn't apology exactly, but recognition, raw and uncomfortable. People who had dismissed her now spoke her name carefully, like it was something that deserved respect, not because it sounded heroic, but because it had kept others alive. She didn't smile, not because she didn't feel relief, but because relief didn't erase what she'd seen in the basin. They asked about her frostbitten fingers. The medic examined them, frowning. The tips were pale, tender, a warning of damage. They asked about the tremor she tried to hide when she lifted a cup. Cold and adrenaline and hours of tension left residue. Heroism, if you wanted to call it that, didn't come clean. Someone noticed the sealed packet when her gear was inventoried. A junior officer asked about it, casual, like it was paperwork. Her eyes hardened a fraction. She explained, carefully, that it contained evidence from a prior mission, evidence that had been buried because admitting the truth would have cost people their comfort. Evidence she kept because it reminded her that precision was responsibility, not glory. That a clean shot could still be wrong if it was rushed, if it was taken for ego instead of necessity. The room went quieter again. No one pushed. Some things weren't theirs to pry open. When the debrief ended, people filed out slowly. Conversations were low. A few soldiers nodded at her as they passed. Not exaggerated praise. Not celebration. Just acknowledgement, simple and heavy. Later, when night tried to settle over the pass, she returned to the guard post. Snow had piled higher against its walls. The heater still clicked and sighed, useless as ever. The observation slit was rimed with frost again, delicate and indifferent. She stepped outside and looked at the wind ribbon. It was torn more than before, shredded by gusts. It snapped weakly, frayed threads whipping like small flags. She took a fresh strip of cloth from her kit and tied it on, fingers stiff, knots clumsy with sore skin. She tightened it anyway. She watched how it fluttered, how it fell, how it straightened. Then she opened her notebook and logged the day's weather. Wind direction, gust strength, visibility changes, notes about radio behavior, notes about unnatural marks that had mattered. The world kept turning. The mountains didn't care about plans. They didn't care about pride. They cared about what you did when the horizon disappeared and the clock got loud. She sat back down in the folding chair with her rifle across her lap and put her eye to the long glass again. Outside, the valley was quiet. Snow-muted stillness stretched under thin daylight. And inside that quiet, she felt the weight of what she'd done. Not as a medal, not as a story, as a cost. She had saved them, yes, but saving didn't erase fear. It didn't erase the sight of dark blood on white snow. It didn't erase the sound of a scream swallowed by wind. She breathed in, slow, and let the exhale leave her in a controlled line. Function over feeling. Quiet competence. Because in the mountains, the people who make it home are often the ones you never notice until the moment everything else fails.